And we're live. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Renny Show. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Rachel. How the devil are you?
I'm not half bad, thank you very much, even though there's loads of clouds in the sky. How are you?
Well, we've got blue sky here today after 4 days of rain. So I am feeling much more chipper because there's nothing like a blue sky and a bit of sunshine to cheer you up, is there?
Absolutely. Gotta love a bit of sunshine. There was sunshine first thing this morning here, so I'm hoping it might make its way back. You never know. So, as always, folks, welcome to the show. And for full transparency, we are actually pre-recording this one. We're not broadcasting live. However, you still get us, warts and all, as we are, unedited in our full glory. So if you're listening, then please do leave comments and ask us questions. You know we love to carry on the conversation. So today we are theming today's show on transitions. There are many transitions that can take place in life, and we thought it would be a great thing to have a discussion about. So, Jenny, my first question for you: how was your transition into parenthood?
Oh, well, so it was tricky in terms of the whole labour and delivery. I was there a long time, and it took a long time, and it didn't go as I had expected, and I ended up having an emergency cesarean section. So my recovery period was a lot longer in those days. You stayed in hospital for quite a long time in those days, and I also couldn't drive for 6 weeks, and
Yeah.
so that transition, so in some ways there were benefits because all I could do was look after the baby,
Yeah.
and I was incredibly blessed that my mum came to look after me for those 6 weeks. So she did the cooking and the hoovering and everything else that I couldn't do.
Yeah.
So it was a really joyful time, apart from the lack of sleep, which everybody knows about.
Of course.
And I it was just wonderful to have that kind of uh, support, unconditional love and support. And I think my background, for anybody who doesn't know, because there may be a few, my background was in pediatric nursing. So I've been a pediatric nurse for a long time. And the trouble with that is that you know lots of stuff on a professional basis, and you've looked after hundreds of sick babies. So I
Yeah.
thought that because I had looked after many, sick babies over the years, that having a healthy one at home with just one of them and just me would be really easy. But I forgot, of course, that deep emotional connection when it's your baby. Um, and that wasn't and was a surprise, because of course you think, and you suddenly realize all the questions that you ask parents when they bring their children into hospital. You ask them about, what is your baby like? You get to know your baby through the parent, and of course now I was like, oh, and I don't know what this baby likes because it's new. He's new and I have no idea. Um, so it was both incredibly joyful and tricky. And no baby comes with a rule book, does it?
No.
Whether you're adopting, whether you've had it, whether you're gaining children through new relationships and blended families, however
Yeah.
you um, collect an addition to your family in the form of a baby or a child. None of them come with a manual, and each one of them is different. So, of course, that we're all unique human beings. So, even if you had a manual for one, that manual
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily work for another one. So, it is is such a uh, it's such a period, isn't it? Well, and it never ends,
Yeah.
of learning and going with your gut and trying to see what works. And if that doesn't work, you try something else. So it is um, such a huge and ongoing adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and whilst my experience was different, I mean, it was a relatively long labour, but no complications or anything. But I think, and I've said this a number of times over the years, I almost feel like there's some kind of global conspiracy to not tell parents what parenthood is actually going to be like, because there's all these antenatal classes that you can go to, and they'll tell you about what's going to happen during the birth and all the rest of it. No one really tells you the reality of what it's going to be like when you've got that tiny human that's utterly reliant on you. And so the transition from being pregnant or being a family that doesn't have a child in the ways that you've described, to then suddenly, because whichever way it happens, it's sudden. There is a
It's
day
sudden.
on which suddenly it's that life is just completely different. And like you say, because there's no there's no rule book or manual, you are having to learn as you go, make it up as you go. And I think there's such an overwhelming desire to want to do the right thing for that baby or child, that you can then end up putting quite a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect. I mean, everyone knows, if you listen to us, how we feel about perfection and the word perfect. But you have this idea, I think, before you have a baby or child in your life, of what it's going to be like, and the reality, I think, is just very different. Not necessarily in a bad way. It's just
Just
it comes
mm,
as a shock. And I think that in terms of transitions, that's something that can be really quite hard to get to grips with. For me personally, I did have postnatal depression after having Annabelle, and that just, when I look back, I think just added just another layer of complication to what was already a complicated scenario. And I, like you, I was very lucky, and my mum came to help, so it wasn't just Darren and I kind of flailing, not knowing what what to do and what was going on. And I tried. Lots of people may well have heard of Gina Ford, and I tried using her book because I thought, great, have a system. Why not? Military background, have a system. That's good. And I think I sent myself around the twist, trying to keep to that system. And I think it genuinely, and this is no offence to Gina Ford, there's many books or systems you can try and follow. And I think it potentially added to my postnatal depression, because I was putting so much pressure on myself to do what that book was telling me, that I literally did send myself around the twist. So yeah, I think in terms of transitions, I would say to people, be prepared. It's going to be probably nothing like you imagine, but also in the best ways, as well as the worst ways, particularly when you're sleep deprived. But be kind to yourself, because no one's got all the answers. No one's got that rule book. So just go with it and be kind to yourself. Yeah.
so thank you. My first question for you is, what's the most dramatic transition you have ever, I was gonna say, encountered, been through? Yeah, what's the most dramatic, or the biggest transition, the transition that had the biggest impact on your way of being?
Interesting. I think that there's potentially sort of multiple elements to to what led to it, and I think there's so many strands of my life that kind of come into it and pull it together. But I think probably going away to university. I grew up in Portsmouth, and I was very much a home bird. I loved being at home. When there was a time that Mum was talking about having to sell the house because the endowment wasn't going to pay off, I was beside myself. I want to live here the rest of my life. This is where I've grown up. This is what I know. So I was very much attached to home and to family. So to move from Portsmouth to Birmingham to go to university was huge. And I can't quite really even remember all of the thoughts that went through my head related to that and what drove me to do it. It was almost that I just knew I was going to go to university, and so it almost didn't matter where. But when I think about the actual mechanics of that transition, I mean, I think I probably cried the entire way there in the car, and then cried when my mum and stepdad left, and was utterly bereft. And oh my goodness, what have I done? I'm now on my own. Oh crikey! But there was something in me that was driving me forward to do it. And I'm quite a sociable person, so I was able to make friends quite quickly. But I do think of all the transitions I've been through in my life, I think that was probably the most dramatic one, because I had to learn to look after myself, and I had to start learning more about me and what I'm capable of. And I think that really set me up in a big way for what was then to come. I mean, joining the Air Force and moving around and having a completely different life. I'd always been such a home bird, but I think untying or letting go of the apron strings at 18 to move away from home, if I hadn't have done that, would I still have joined the Air Force? I don't know. I mean, it's one of those questions you can never know the answer to. But I think going through that made me more able and more equipped, I suppose, to then go through all the different things that were going to happen in a career that involved moving around, when I'd always thought I was someone who didn't want to move around. So for me, that was quite a dramatic thing. Yeah. What about for you?
I think, and it's as you were talking there, I was just getting a thought of that, because there are kind of transitions that we kind of plan for over our lives, aren't there? So
Yeah.
when you go from nursery to school, to to infant school, and then you go from infant school to big school, and then you might do, I don't know, cubs, and then scouts, and then rainbows, and
Yeah.
whatever. So there are sort of planned transitions that we can prepare for. How well we prepare for them, re your point about antenatal. But you can kind of plan for them, and then there are those transitions that happen completely unexpectedly. And I
Yeah.
think for me, the biggest transition for me, which was almost like it was being run over by a truck, was my divorce.
Yeah.
Because it came out of the blue,
Yeah.
and it was so. I came from a family that had never had one, so
Yes.
I had no experience of it at all. Well, no, and nobody in my family did. So it was a complete sideswipe,
Yeah.
and so not only are you having to get to grips with a completely unknown process incredibly quickly, and kind of feel your way, um, you also again have that enormous roller coaster of shock and sorrow and bewilderment and all of just about every emotion in the book that you can think of. And at the same time, you have to go to work and
Yeah.
carry on managing your family. And so
Yeah.
you're doing all those things. And I think one of the things that I remember was that I thought I was doing such a good job of being normal,
Mm.
and going. But I know that from a work perspective, I would go to meetings, and I knew I was there because I had the minutes, but I have no
Yeah.
recollection of what happened at those.
Yeah.
And they people used to say, it's like the lights are on, but nobody's home. Are you familiar with that expression?
Yeah.
So um, people who didn't know me wouldn't have spotted it, but
Yeah.
people, and I remember saying to one of my consultants, because I was working in the NHS then, and telling him what happened, and he was like, he said, I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
And he said, but I knew there was something wrong. And I was like, how did you know? And he said, well, look at you. And I was like, but I'm doing so well on the outside. He's like, maybe on the outside, but on the inside, you're a wreck. And I was like, well, yeah, that's a fair comment. So I think what I've learned over the years is that you can, that alignment between what's going on the inside, and the
Yeah.
public face that you put on. Um, and as with many difficult, challenging transitions, at the time, it was awful. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
hideous, horrible, 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 horrible. And if anybody who is listening is going through that at the moment, please, we have you, we hear you,
Yeah.
we see you, and um, it taught me so much about myself,
Yeah.
and you don't ever really know what you're truly capable of until you are
Yeah.
absolutely up against it, do you? um and I think that they always say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
um yes, it is true. And I now, 20 years later, I can say, from way the other side, that I am grateful for that experience because of what it taught me. But I sure as hell wasn't grateful at the time. It was
No,
hard.
absolutely. And that resonates enormously for me because as a relatively young child, I watched my parents go through divorce, and I do think that watching my mum and how she dealt with that, how she navigated that, and how she had to maintain strength and still function every day and work and do all those things you describe, still sort of run the family. And I think that's got a huge amount to do with why I'm like I am, because I watched her and I learned from her about resilience and the in the same way as you. I look back now, there were some very difficult times during that period, but
Mm.
um, I am grateful for the fact that it did, even at a young age, start to show me who I am and what I'm capable of. And I think that's the one of the key takeaways. I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. With most of the challenges in life, they can feel utterly, utterly, horrendously overwhelming and bad and awful at the time. But the things later down the line we can learn and take from them and take forward are also quite potentially quite magical. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So my next question for you, Jenny, this brings things a bit more into vaguely more recent times. But bearing in mind the fact that we're both self-employed, I thought it'd be really interesting to ask, how did you deal with the transition from employment as a nurse to self-employment?
Well, actually, I wasn't a nurse when I was. The transition to my own business was when I had moved into learning and development. So I was corporate,
Right.
so I was working in a corporate setting, and in a particularly toxic corporate setting, it has to be said. And so the transition to my own business was joyful on one level, um, and of course the first thing you realize is that, particularly for people of my personality type, for whom attention to detail isn't necessarily um, a priority. What I realized was how much I didn't know, and how much about running a business you have to learn quickly. And I think probably in common with many people who go into business, you become Jenny Many Hats, or the equivalent, don't you? Because you have to learn how to do, marketing, sales, accounts, all of these things. So you're
Yeah.
juggling all of those things, when actually all you want to do is to do the thing, do the
Yeah.
thing that you love. And so I think what supported me, uh, and again, there we've got some key themes, haven't we, that are emerging. Um, at a time of transition, the thing that really helped was having great support, and
Yeah.
not outsourcing. Recognize, and again, self-awareness, recognizing that there were things that I was really good at, which is the thing that I wanted to do. And there are things that I'm not so good at, like
Mm.
admin and bookkeeping and all of that stuff, which doesn't bring me joy, and takes me forever, because I'm worry about it, because it's just awful. And it causes me great stress and angst, um, which is not how I want to live. So I made the decision quite early on to outsource some of those things, and it was the best decision ever,
Yeah.
because my bookkeeper is a bookkeeper because she loves it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and she doing my stuff, actually probably doing my stuff doesn't bring her great joy, but I hope it does. It's relatively straightforward, and when I forget stuff, she reminds me. So
Yeah.
I think having the right support about you, and asking asking for help, asking for
Yeah.
advice and support from other people who have been there before you. Because one of the other things I learned very quickly was, it is very easy to throw a lot of money at stuff
Yeah.
that you don't
Yeah.
actually need initially, because people have said, oh, you must have this, or you must have that, you must have this.
Yeah.
And you can spend a lot of money having things that actually you don't need. So having really good advisors and support, so business networking, people who've been there before, is
Yeah.
invaluable. So that kind of finding the right support actually makes the transition fun, which is of course what it should be, isn't it? When you go into
Yeah.
business for yourself, it I believe that it should be fun, and that um you've done it for a reason, and
Yeah.
fun is a good thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. When you talk about the support again, that very much resonates with me and makes me think about my experience, because when I first transitioned into business, I was still in the Air Force. So I started my business in network marketing and health and well-being. And what was wonderful about that is it was very, very supported. Lots of people malign network marketing, but in terms of personal development, growth, and support, it's one of the best things out there. So for me, who was very much in an employee mindset. You know, I hadn't particularly set out to have my own business in the first place, but I saw the time freedom that was possible through having my own business. So you know, it's one of those, you know, you jump in 2 feet, not really knowing kind of anything about it. But the support that was available to help that transition, you know, I feel quite fortunate because I still was in the Air Force, so I still had that security in terms of money coming in, and I had so much support around me and training available to help me learn how to grow that business, that when I then had left the Air Force and trained to become a coach, that transition, I feel very grateful, was simpler because by then I'd been running my network marketing business for a while. I had been networking. I had been, you know, because every time you go to a networking meeting, you learn something, don't you? Whether it's through someone you've spoken to or whoever the speaker is. And you start to learn about the importance of network. And so when you work on your own, we all know that that can be quite lonely. So having that network of support around you is utterly priceless. You know, I think when I first left the Air Force, I think I was doing more networking than actual business because I was so focused on needing the human connection and the support of that network. You know, it took me a while to find the balance of, you know, yes, you need to do some networking, but you need to actually do some work as well. Otherwise you don't get paid. But yeah, I would absolutely echo that the support is absolutely key because there's such a learning process to take place, and the fact that you have to start wearing so many hats, you know, that can be quite overwhelming. But when you've got the right support in place, then it can become you know, it's not the transition isn't always joyful, but I'm with you that you know, you really do need to be enjoying what you're doing and find the joy and the fun in what you're doing. Otherwise, kind of, why are you doing it? So yeah, I think we agree again, Jenny. Surprise, surprise. Okay, so what's your question for me?
My next question is, what's the one piece of advice, if it were asked for, of course, that you would give somebody who is going through a transition of any kind at the moment?
Okay. So many things that could be. I think for me, the important, I mean, because, you know, there are so many different types of transition that you could possibly go through. But the one thing that's a common thread through that is people, the person. So the biggest thing I think is to be kind to yourself, because if you're, you know, again, it's different if it's a transition that's been forced upon you, as we've spoken about, that came as a shock, or whether it's a transition you're expecting. Either way, you've got things that need to be dealt with, and, you know, usually because it's a period of transition, you realize that there is not necessarily an end state, but there is a progression, there is a goal, there is, you know, something that's looking to be achieved. And I think being kind to yourself within that is absolutely crucial, because let's face it, transitions can be really, really difficult. I mean, you know, it's often talked about, isn't it, that the most difficult situations in life, I mean, they're all transitions: moving home, marriage, bereavement, you know, they're all things, divorce as well, you know, they're all things that are, you know, moving from one phase to another and can potentially be very, very difficult to deal with. So I think, you know, keeping your eye on what the goal is, but be kind to yourself along the way, because there is a task to be achieved, if you like, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. So be kind to yourself along the way, I think, is my biggest thing. What about you?
I think mine is about communicate. so they're kind of
Yeah.
linked, aren't they? No surprise there. Is
Yeah.
that when you are going through whatever transition it can be, um, there can be an element of um, what will people think? I think
Yes.
comparisonitis raises, in my research about comparisonitis, um, for the book that never happened. That's another story, for another day. But I did a lot of research around comparisonitis, and what I found was that we are most vulnerable to comparisonitis at periods of
Yeah.
transition, because
Yeah.
because that's when you look to see what other people are doing, how other people do it. And when you are in a difficult or a challenging transition, whether you've chosen it, or it's been foisted upon you, um is that because you are in a state of not knowing,
Yeah.
um, you compare yourself to other people, and it feels like everybody knows it better than you. So I think my one piece of advice, should it be asked for, is that share what you're going through, because actually,
Yes.
in my experience, when you share, so for my divorce, for example, I felt huge shame. I felt that I'd
Yeah.
failed. I felt that I'd really messed up. It wasn't, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. And there was a shame attached to it. And what I found was that when I plucked up the courage to share what had happened, actually, I received incredible support and compassion and care, and uh, and those were the things that got helped me through. So my advice would be, talk about it, because once you've said it, and I absolutely appreciate that, saying it out loud for the first time, whatever it is,
Yeah.
whatever transition you're in, can be really difficult. Um, and that the people who judge you are not your people.
Yeah.
Um, the people who listen and who care are your people, and they are the ones to hang on to. So, and it's never as bad the second time you say it, or the third, or the
Yeah.
fourth, or the fifth. And the more often you say it, the less prickly and the less difficult it becomes.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's absolutely borne out in my experience. I've mentioned already today about when I had postnatal depression after having my first daughter. I thought I was completely alone. I thought, oh well, I'm rubbish at this. Then I'm not. I'm useless at parenthood. It's clearly not working, and I felt very alone. When I then
Mm.
started going to baby groups, I realised I was. Oh my goodness, was I not alone? There wasn't a person I met that was finding it all really easy and wonderful and lovely all the time. So yeah, that sense of knowing that you're not alone, I think, is really, really important when you're going through transition. So yeah, thanks for highlighting that. It's a really important one. Okay, so my final question for you today, Jenny, is what's the transition you're most proud of?
Oh, um, well, there's quite a few. So
Fabulous.
I'll list them. Yes, I'm so glad you asked. I am incredibly proud of the transition from employed to self-employed. Um, I am incredibly proud of the transition from, I was going to say person to coach. I don't uncoach to coach. I don't know
Yeah,
what are you when you're not a coach. So I'm incredibly proud because, and just a tiny bit of context, as a nurse for 45 years, you we are trained to give advice,
yeah,
to fix things, to solutionize, to find the answers, to help people make informed decisions by giving them lots of information and all of that. So
yeah,
um much more a mentoring role than a coach. So that transition for me from that to coaching was like a almost a vertical learning curve, to learn to
yeah,
keep my mouth shut. Um was huge, and I'm incredibly proud of that. Um, the transition from um, mum to grandmother, which has nothing to do with me, of course, but I'm incredibly proud of that, and it is the most joyful adventure ever. Um, and I think I'm also incredibly proud, although it's a very new transition, I am incredibly proud of transitioning to the older being mature,
Yeah,
being the older generation. Um,
yeah,
I'm incredibly proud of being pro aging. I
yeah,
think aging is a such a privilege,
yes,
and I'm really relishing that transition, because there is a certain freedom in mid in your prime,
yeah,
that when you think about people like Dame Maggie Smith, who we lost
yeah,
last week, um and her whole way of being, she for me, there are so many fabulous mature women who have
yeah,
been such an influence, such a positive influence for aging, and I am part of that movement who would like to see anti-aging
yeah,
removed from every package, every article, every whatever, and that we move into a way of being where we celebrate maturity and
yeah,
age and wisdom, and platinum. Um, and all of those things, and that we embrace it and celebrate it, for absolutely as long as we possibly have it.
yeah. Absolutely love that. That's brilliant. I'm right with you. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I'd have to answer the question in a similar way. I can't pick just one because there's so many things that have been so important to who I am and what makes me me. Um, so the transition into the Air Force, which a number of people thought I wouldn't be able to achieve, thought it wasn't the right thing for me, thought I wouldn't be able to do all the things that were required to be an officer in the Air Force. And I achieved that. And that transition was hard, I will admit. I didn't always find it easy. But what it then brought me in terms of career and meeting my husband and making many many friends for life and the experiences I had, wonderful. If I hadn't gone through that transition, there are so many things that then potentially wouldn't have happened. I'm also immensely proud. 5 years into that career, many people will know, if you followed me for a while, that I had a breakdown in the Air Force, which was brought on by the job that I was doing, controlling aircraft. It really just did not suit me and my psyche at all. But there was a time I thought I wouldn't be able to come out the other side of that. So coming out the other side of that, having learned so much about myself, is a transition I'm so proud of, because that I feel that's when well, it's not when it started necessarily, but that was one of the biggest things that happened to me, that then helped equip me for dealing with other things that came, but also understanding myself, but understanding other people even more. And as a coach, obviously, that's a really useful skill. And I think also the transition out of the Air Force and out of employment into self-employment. I'm really proud of where things are at now in terms of my business. It's still growing, and there are still other things that I'm looking to add into the mix of what I do. But considering I'm someone who had zero aspirations to be self-employed, I'm so proud that I've been able to make that transition, and that I have a functioning business. You know, it's something to be immensely proud of. And obviously, I mean, I say obviously, not necessarily obvious, but I have to give a mention for the transition into parenthood. You know, it wasn't always easy, and as we've discussed this morning, there's no rule book, and even, you know, the eldest is 15 now, and there's still no rule book, and you still make it up as you go along. But I'm so proud of how that transition was dealt with, and the joy it's brought since. You know, that's utterly priceless. So yeah, same as you, a number of things on the list.
And my third question, I guess it's almost not a question.
Ooh,
It's an observation, because I think we've shared so many juicy bits in this
yeah.
program around transitions. So my question is around, um, again, the kind of themes that have emerged from our conversation. Um, can you summarize the things that you have taken from our conversation today?
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic question. The key theme I think that's come out is certainly communication, the importance of, you know, having the courage to say it that first time, because it does get easier, and support. That's definitely another key theme. You know, it's so important to not feel like you're on your own when you're in a period of transition, and the difference it can make to feel supported. You know, I think the thing I would say for me these days as well, I'm much more able to support myself as well. I don't, that doesn't mean I don't ask for external support. I absolutely do, because I thrive on human contact and friendship, and, you know, all the things that we get from being around other people. But for me these days, there's a much stronger foundation of being able to support myself, but the self-awareness, and again, I think that's another key theme that's come out, having the self-awareness to ask for that support. You know, when going back to when I had my eldest, and I was basically at home on my own a lot of the time, for the first few weeks anyway, not asking for support. You know, I didn't initially tell anyone how horrendous I was feeling, and, you know, the difference that taught me so much about the difference it can make to pluck up the courage to say it that first time, so that you get that support. And, you know, and at that point, you know, these arms just kind of fold around you. There's a collective kind of hug that goes on at that point. So, you know, that taught me a lot in terms of, don't stay silent. If you need support, ask for it. You know, that it might be difficult to do so, and that first time might be painful, but the difference it can make when you actually do it is huge. So yeah.
That's great summing up. I think great summing up. So yes, support. There is no rule book. There is
Yeah.
transitions are something that happen to all of us.
Yeah.
Along I think it's called life.
Yeah.
And if you're living it, there will be transitions that you can plan for, and prepare for. And even when you plan and prepare for them, they might not always work out exactly as you had planned and prepared
Yeah.
for, but you will get through them. Secondly, there are those transitions that you have, that come like blindside you, that come out
Yeah.
of nowhere, that you're not prepared for. Um, and I think those transitions happen to all of us. And again,
Yeah.
reaching out for support. There isn't a right, most of the time there isn't only one way to get through. There are multiple ways, and
Yeah.
different things work for different people. So don't be afraid to ask for what you need. It might be different from what you think you might need. So I think that, um, we're not in it. We're all in this. We're better together is a
Yes.
great adage that we talk a lot about on the Renny Show, that we're better together, and there will
Maybe that
always
should be
be
our
somebody
hashtag, better together.
better together. Yeah. There will always be somebody who will understand, who will
Yeah,
support, and will help you through, because that's our shared humanity. Um, and it's certainly something that I have been experiencing a lot at the moment. And that
yeah,
shared humanity, is what makes us human.
yeah, absolutely. Love that. Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the show then, Jenny. So for anyone listening, really hope you've enjoyed it. I think we can all agree that there's been some really important stuff there that we could all do with remembering about, support and communication in times of transition. So if you need support, have the courage to reach out, ask someone for that support, and you might be quite pleasantly surprised about what you find. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you all again very soon. Thank you, Jenny. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you. And again, you might be in the position of noticing that somebody might be struggling. So if you aren't struggling and you have some leftover compassion and care and love to give to give to somebody else, reach out today. Just check in on your friends. I also want to say check in chicken. Check in on your friends, your colleagues, your neighbours. Just see how they're doing. And until we speak again, be inspired, be brilliant, and take good care of each other. Bye for now.
Bye.